Every species in the galaxy had a word for weakness. The Draven called it Keth Null, meaning born without fire. The Vorani used shipwreck, a term reserved for creatures too small to cast a shadow worth noticing. The Grothan, those massive 12-foot warriors covered in bone-like armor plating, simply pointed and laughed. They did not need a special word because, in their culture, weakness was not a concept worth naming. It was simply eliminated at birth. But none of them, not a single species across 17 known star systems, had a word for what Commander Raya Vasquez actually was, because what she was had never existed before in their understanding of the universe. She was 5 feet and 2 inches of something they could not classify, could not measure, and most dangerously of all, could not predict. This is not a story about a small woman who got lucky. This is not a story about an underdog who found the right moment. This is the story of the single most dangerous tactical mind the Galactic Union had ever failed to notice, and what happened when an empire of giants made the catastrophic mistake of judging her by the only metric that had never mattered in war: her size. The day everything changed began the same way most terrible days begin, with paperwork and bad coffee. Rhea sat in the briefing room of Forward Station Coral 1, a military outpost positioned on the edge of Union-controlled space. The station was old. Its walls carried the scent of recycled air that had been breathed by 10,000 soldiers before her. The lights above flickered every 40 seconds, a rhythm she had memorized during her first week stationed there because memorizing patterns was something her brain did whether she wanted it to or not. She held a ceramic mug that was too large for her hands. Everything on this station was too large for her hands. The chairs were built for Varani officers whose average height was 7 feet. The control panels were positioned at chest height for Draven technicians who stood at 6.5 feet minimum. Even the doorways seemed to mock her, towering above her head with enough clearance to remind her every single time she walked through one that this galaxy had not been designed with humans in mind. And certainly not with her in mind. Raya had been assigned to Coral 9 as a logistics coordinator. That was the official title. The unofficial reality was that she had been placed here because no one in the Union military command knew what else to do with her. She was human, and humans were still relatively new to the galactic stage. Earth had made contact with the Union only 43 years ago, and in that time, humanity had been granted provisional membership, limited military integration rights, and a reputation that sat somewhere between curiosity and pity. Humans were soft. That was the consensus. They had no natural armor, no claws, no venom glands, no electromagnetic field sensitivity, no ability to survive in vacuum even for a few seconds. Their bones broke. Their skin tore. They bled red, which the Grothan found particularly amusing because red was the color of their least threatening prey animals back on their homeworld. And among humans, Raya was considered small even by their own standards. She weighed 115 pounds. Her wrists were thin enough that standard-issue Union combat gauntlets would not stay on without 3 layers of adaptive padding. During her physical evaluation upon arrival at Coral 9, the Varani medical officer had stared at her readings for a long time, then looked at her, then looked back at the readings, and asked if there had been a clerical error in her species classification. There had not been. She was exactly what she appeared to be. A small human woman with dark hair pulled back tight, brown eyes that did not flinch, and a service record that no one on this station had bothered to read because why would they? She was a logistics coordinator. She moved supplies from one place to another using spreadsheets and communication relays. She was background noise. She was the person you forgot was in the room 5 seconds after she entered it, and that was exactly how she preferred it. The briefing room filled slowly that morning. First came Lieutenant Gorath, a Grothan officer who had to turn sideways to fit through the door. His bone plating clicked against itself as he moved, a sound like stones being stacked. He saw Raya and did what he always did, looked over her head as if she were a piece of furniture, and took his seat at the far end of the table. His chair groaned under his weight. Next came Senior Analyst Dyra, a Varani female with silver-blue skin and 4 arms that she used with unsettling independence from each other. 2 arms would be typing on a datapad while the other 2 gestured in conversation. All 4 operating on different tasks simultaneously. Dyra was polite to Raya in the way that very tall people are sometimes polite to very short people, with a gentleness that carried an undercurrent of something that was not quite respect. Then came Captain Drevik Solan, the station commander. Drevik was Draven, reptilian in appearance with scales the color of burned copper and eyes that glowed faintly amber in low light. He was efficient, humorless, and had been commanding Corel 9 for 6 years without a single notable incident. He considered this his greatest achievement. He did not want notable incidents. He wanted supply lines that ran on time and status reports that said nothing interesting. Raya had never given him a reason to think about her twice, and she intended to keep it that way. But the universe, as it often does, had other plans. Drevik activated the holographic display at the center of the table. A star map materialized, showing the region of space surrounding Corel. 9 blue markers indicated Union positions. Red markers indicated known hostile territories. And there, at the edge of the map, blinking with the slow pulse of a new contact, was a yellow marker. Yellow meant unknown. Yellow meant something had been detected that did not match any existing profile in the Union database. 47 hours ago, Drevik began, his voice carrying the rasp common to all Draven speech. Our long-range sensor array detected an object moving through the Kesserin corridor. Initial readings suggested it was an asteroid fragment. Routine. Unremarkable. He paused. The map zoomed in on the yellow marker. Updated readings tell a different story. The object was not an asteroid. The holographic image resolved into something that made Gorath lean forward in his chair and Thyra's 4 hands go still all at once. It was a machine. Massive, angular, built from materials that the sensors could not fully identify. Its shape suggested purpose, not natural formation. There were lines along its surface that could only be structural supports. There were apertures that could only be weapon ports. And at its center, buried deep within layers of unknown alloy, was an energy signature that pulsed with a rhythm that was almost biological. The object is approximately 900 meters in length, Drevik continued. 400 meters at its widest point. It is not transmitting any identification signals. It is not responding to communication attempts, and it is on a trajectory that will bring it within weapons range of this station in approximately 72 hours. Silence filled the room. The kind of silence that happens when everyone is doing math in their heads and none of the answers are good. Gorath spoke first. A derelict. Drifting. No power, no crew. We should send a salvage team. The energy signature suggests it is not without power, Thyra countered, her voice measured and careful in the way that scientists speak when they are trying not to alarm anyone. The readings are consistent with a dormant reactor, not a dead one. Dormant implies it can wake up. Then we destroy it before it does, Gorath said, as if this were obvious, as if the solution to every unknown was to hit it hard enough that it stopped being unknown. Drevik shook his head. Union protocol requires identification before engagement. We cannot fire on an unidentified object without authorization from Central Command, and Central Command is 9 relay jumps from here. Communication lag is approximately 30 miles away from there. So we wait, Gorath said. We have 72 hours, Drevik confirmed. We use that time to gather more information. I want a reconnaissance probe launched within the hour. Full sensor sweep. I want to know what this thing is before it gets close enough for us to need to know what it does. The meeting continued for another 20 minutes. Assignments were given. Gorath would oversee defensive preparations. Thyra would analyze incoming sensor data. Drevik would handle communications with Central Command. And Raya would continue managing supply logistics because that was her job, and no one in this room considered her relevant to anything else. She did not argue. She did not raise her hand. She did not offer an opinion. She sat in her oversized chair with her oversized mug and she listened. And while she listened, she did something that no one else in that room was doing. She studied the energy signature. Not with the station's sensors, not with any equipment. She studied it with her memory, because Raya Vasquez had a memory that worked differently from most people's. She did not have what old Earth psychologists would have called photographic memory. It was something else, something less precise but more useful. She remembered patterns, not images, not words, of the underlying structures of things. The way a rhythm repeated, the way a shape echoed another shape, the way a system organized itself revealed its purpose if you knew how to listen. And this energy signature had a pattern she recognized. She had seen it before. Not this exact signature, but something built on the same principles. The same mathematical relationships between pulse intervals. The same harmonic decay curve. The same way the energy built, held, and released in cycles that were too regular to be mechanical and too precise to be organic. She had seen it 7 years ago, on a world called Arthon 4. In the middle of the worst day of her life, Raya did not mention this to anyone. She finished her coffee, returned her mug to the galley, and went back to her quarters. Her quarters were the smallest on the station, originally designed as a storage closet before being converted into living space when the human integration program required a room for its single representative. There was a bunk, a desk, a terminal, and exactly enough floor space to stand and turn around without touching the walls. If she kept her elbows tight, she sat at a terminal and accessed the station's historical database. She searched for Aethon 4. The results came back sparse. Most of the records had been classified at a level far above her current clearance. But the basic facts were there. The facts that had been sanitized for general knowledge. Aethon 4. A colonial outpost. Population at the time of the incident, 12,000. Current population, 0. Cause of depopulation, military engagement with an unidentified autonomous war machine. Classification of the machine, Titan class. Outcome, total loss. The colony was destroyed. The war machine was eventually disabled through unspecified means. All surviving personnel were reassigned. Details remained classified. Rhea stared at the screen. The cold blue light of the terminal reflected in her eyes. She did not blink for a very long time. She knew what details remained classified because she was one of those details. She had been on Aethon 4. She had been 23 years old, fresh out of Earth's military academy, assigned to the colony as part of a human goodwill delegation meant to demonstrate that humans could contribute to Union colonial defense. She had been the youngest and smallest member of a 12-person human squad, embedded within the colony's Varani Defense Force. And when the Titan came, when that enormous machine descended from orbit and began systematically dismantling every structure, every vehicle, every living thing in its path, then she had been one of two. Then she had been one of one. What happened after that was the classified part. What happened after that was the reason she had been quietly moved from combat roles to logistics coordination. Not as a punishment, not as a demotion, but as a containment measure. Because what she had done on Aethon 4 had frightened people. Not the enemy, not the machine. It had frightened her own side. It had frightened the Union officers who reviewed the after-action reports. It had frightened the psychologists who interviewed her afterward and found nothing wrong with her, which frightened them more than if they had found something. A small human woman had done something to a Titan-class war machine that should not have been possible, and no one could explain how, and that meant no one could control it. And things that cannot be controlled get put in storage closets and given spreadsheets and forgotten. Until now. Raya closed the database search. She opened a new file on her terminal and began writing. Not a report, not a request. She began writing a tactical assessment of the approaching object based on what she remembered from Arthon 4, she wrote from memory, pulling details that she had never been asked about because no one had ever thought to ask the logistics coordinator about combat tactics. She wrote for 3 hours. When she finished, she had 14 pages of analysis that included the machine's likely movement patterns, its probable weapon configurations, its structural weak points based on the harmonic resonance of its energy signature, and a step-by-step tactical approach for engaging it with the limited resources available on Corel 9. She saved the file. She did not send it to anyone. Not yet. She would wait. She would watch. She would see if the reconnaissance probe confirmed what she already knew. And if it did, if this was truly another Titan-class machine, then the people on this station were going to learn something that the universe had been trying to teach every species in the galaxy since the beginning of time. Size is a measurement. It tells you how much space something takes up. It tells you nothing about what that space contains. A supernova begins as a point of light. A plague begins as a single cell. And the deadliest tactical mind in the history of interstellar warfare began as a quiet woman in an oversized chair, holding an oversized mug, saying nothing while everyone around her made the same mistake that every enemy she had ever faced had made. I looked at her, and they saw nothing worth worrying about. The hours passed slowly on Coral 9. The station operated on a standard Union day cycle of 26 hours, but time seemed to stretch under the weight of uncertainty. The reconnaissance probe had been launched as Drevik ordered, a small automated craft bristling with sensors programmed to approach the unknown object, perform a full sweep, and return its data via encrypted burst transmission. It would reach the object in approximately 18 hours. In the meantime, the station hummed with the tension that everyone felt, but no one named. Gorath spent his time in the armory, checking weapon systems and muttering to himself in the deep, grinding language of his people. Thyra remained in the sensor lab, her forearms dancing across multiple terminals as she analyzed and reanalyzed the preliminary data. Drevik stayed on the command deck, composing and recomposing his message to Central Command, trying to describe an unknown threat in terms that would convey urgency without triggering panic. And Raya moved supplies. She checked inventory manifests. She confirmed delivery schedules. She filed requisition forms for replacement water filters and medical supplies. She did her job with the quiet efficiency she always displayed, walking the corridors of the station like a ghost, noticed by no one, remembered by no one, exactly as she had designed her life to be for the past 7 years. But behind her calm exterior, behind those steady brown eyes, her mind was doing something else entirely. It was running calculations. It was mapping the station's layout against defensive positions. It was counting ammunition stores, evaluating power distribution networks, identifying choke points and escape routes and structural vulnerabilities. It was doing what her mind had always done since she was a child growing up in the dense, chaotic streets of Manila, where being small meant you survived by being smart, and being smart meant seeing the patterns that everyone else missed. She passed a group of Grothan soldiers in the corridor. There were 4 of them, each one towering over her by at least 3 feet, their bone-plated bodies filling the hallway like living walls. One of them noticed her and nudged another. The second one looked down at her and made a sound that she had learned to recognize as Grothan amusement. Not quite a laugh, more like the grinding of a heavy door on its hinges. Human! The soldier said the word carrying the weight of a species that had spent its entire evolutionary history solving problems through physical dominance. In Grothan culture, size determined everything. Rank, mating rights, social standing, all of it was tied to physical mass and the ability to break things with your body. A creature Raya's size would not have survived childhood on their homeworld. She looked up at the soldier. She did not smile. She did not frown. She simply looked at him with an expression that was perfectly, carefully, absolutely neutral. "Soldier," she replied, and walked past them. Behind her, she heard the grinding sound again, the Grothaean equivalent of laughter. It followed her down the corridor and around the corner, and she let it go the way she had let every similar moment go for the past 7 years. The laughter of those who could not imagine what she was, the dismissal of those who measured threat in pounds and inches, the quiet, comfortable arrogance of beings who had never been forced to fight something so much bigger than themselves that size itself became meaningless. They would learn. If the probe confirmed what she believed, they would all learn. And the lesson would not be gentle. She returned to her quarters and locked the door. She pulled up her tactical assessment on the terminal and read through it once more, checking her own work with the same ruthless attention she applied to everything. The analysis was solid. The patterns matched. The energy signature of the approaching object shared too many structural similarities with the Aethon 4 Titan to be coincidence. This was a war machine, built by someone or something that no species in the Union had identified. Built to be enormous, autonomous, and devastating beyond anything the standard military doctrine was prepared to handle. The Titan at Aethon 4 had destroyed a colony defended by 2,000 trained soldiers, orbital defense platforms, and heavy armored vehicles. It had done this in less than 6 hours, and something very much like it was heading directly for a forward station defended by a skeleton crew. Raya closed her eyes. Behind her eyelids, the memories of Aethon 4 played like a recording she could not delete. The sound of the sky splitting open as the machine descended, the way the ground shook when it landed, not like an earthquake but like the planet itself was flinching. The screams that came first from the outer perimeter, then from the middle sectors, then from everywhere at once. The way the communication channels went from organized reports to desperate shouting to static, one by one, like candles being blown out in a storm. She remembered the moment she had been alone, truly alone. Standing in the ruins of a building that had been a school that morning, covered in dust and someone else's blood, holding a weapon that was nearly as long as she was tall, listening to the sound of the Titan moving through the colony like a god walking through a toy city. Each step was a thunderclap. Each weapon discharge was a son being born and dying in the same instant. She had been terrified. She wanted that remembered. She wanted it understood that what she did next was not the action of someone without fear. It was the action of someone who had learned, in the deepest and most permanent way possible, that fear was just information. It told you what was dangerous. It did not tell you what was impossible. And Rhea Vasquez had never been very good at accepting the impossible. She opened her eyes. The terminal screen glowed in front of her. 14 pages of tactical analysis, 7 years of silence, and now 72 hours to decide whether silence was still the right strategy. She saved her file again. She backed it up to a secondary storage device that she kept in a hidden compartment behind her bunk's wall panel. A compartment she had created herself during her first month on the station because old habits from Ethan 4 did not die easily. Then she changed into her sleep clothes, set an alarm for 6 hours, and lay down on her bunk. Sleep came slowly. It always did. But it came because Raya had also learned on Aethon 4 that rest was a weapon, and a soldier who did not sleep was a soldier who made mistakes, and she had not survived by making mistakes. She slept, and in her dreams the Titan walked again, and she walked toward it, and the ground shook, and she was small, so very small, and it did not matter. It had never mattered. It was never going to matter, because the universe's most dangerous things have never been the biggest. They have been the ones that refused to stop. The alarm pulled Rhea out of sleep at exactly the 6-hour mark. She did not hit snooze. She had never hit snooze in her life because snooze was a negotiation with time, and time did not negotiate. It simply moved, and you either moved with it, or you got left in the wreckage of moments you could not get back. She dressed in her standard-issue logistics uniform, the dull grey fabric that marked her as support staff rather than combat personnel. The uniform was the smallest size available in the Union Supply catalog, and it still hung loose on her frame. The sleeves rolled twice at the cuffs, the belt cinched to its tightest notch. She had stopped being embarrassed by this years ago. Clothing was covering. Function mattered. Appearance was a distraction she could not afford. She checked her terminal before leaving her quarters. The reconnaissance probe was still 12 hours from reaching the object. No new data had come in. The yellow marker on the station's tactical display still blinked with that slow, patient pulse, like a heartbeat counting down to something no one on this station was ready for. Rhea made her way to the galley for breakfast. The galley was designed to serve multiple species, which meant it was a complicated room full of dispensers, heating units, and atmospheric separators that kept the Draven's sulfur-rich food vapors from contaminating the Varani's protein cultures. The human food station was in the corner, small and basic, offering reconstituted meals that tasted like what they were, survival fuel wrapped in the memory of flavor. She took a tray and sat alone at a table near the far wall. This was her table. Not because anyone had assigned it to her, but because it was the smallest table in the galley, tucked into a space between 2 support pillars that larger species found uncomfortable. She had claimed it on her first day through the simple act of sitting there, and no one had ever challenged her for it because no one had ever wanted it. She ate mechanically, her mind already working through the day ahead. Supply manifests needed updating. A shipment of replacement power cells was overdue from Relay Station Torek. 3 environmental control units on the lower decks were showing degraded performance and needed spare parts that she would have to requisition through a bureaucratic process designed by Varani administrators who believed that 7 forms were the minimum requirement for any transaction. Normal work. Normal day. Normal life for a woman who was anything but normal, and who had spent 7 years convincing the galaxy otherwise. The galley door opened, and Thyra entered, her silver-blue skin catching the overhead lights in a way that made her look like she was made of liquid metal. She moved directly to the Varani food station, her upper 2 arms selecting nutrition cubes while her lower 2 arms continued typing on a portable data pad she carried everywhere. Thyra did not sleep much. Varani biology allowed them to function on 3-hour rest cycles, which meant Thyra had been analyzing data all night while everyone else had been unconscious. She noticed Raya and changed direction, walking to her table with the long, fluid strides of someone whose legs were designed for a world with higher gravity than most. She sat down across from Raya without asking permission, which was unusual. To Deathy's death every year, Tiger paved bin over the deck, and itself. Iron 9, Tyra had never voluntarily sat at her table. "You were very quiet in the briefing yesterday," Tyra said. Her voice had the harmonic quality common to Varani's speech, each word carrying subtle overtones that conveyed emotional context beyond the literal meaning. "Right now," the overtone said. She was curious, cautious, and slightly troubled. "I am always quiet in briefings," Rhea replied, which was true. "Yes, but yesterday your quietness had a different quality." Thyra's upper right hand paused its work on the datapad. A Varani stopping even one hand was significant. It meant she was giving more attention to the conversation than she usually allocated. "I have been reviewing the preliminary sensor data on the approaching object. The energy signature is unusual. I have cross-referenced it with every known power source in the Union database. There are no matches." Rhea took a bite of her reconstituted eggs. They tasted like warm nothing.
"No matches at all?"
"None that are officially catalogued." However, Thyra leaned forward slightly and now a second hand stopped working. "I expanded my search to include classified incident reports that my security clearance allows me to access. I found a partial match, a 73% correlation with an energy signature recorded at a colonial incident 7 years ago." She kept her eyes on her food. She kept her breathing at exactly the same rate it had been before Thyra sat down. "Athon 4, Thyra said quietly. The name hung in the air between them like smoke from a fire that everyone thought had gone out long ago. "I am familiar with the incident in general terms," Thyra continued. "A Titan-class autonomous war machine attacked and destroyed a Union colony. The machine was eventually neutralized. The specifics are classified beyond my access level. But the energy signature recorded during that event shares structural characteristics with what we are now detecting." She paused. All 4 of her hands were now still, which meant she was giving this conversation her complete and undivided attention, something Rhea had never seen her do with anyone. "I noticed something else when I reviewed your personnel file." Rhea set down her fork. She looked at Thyra directly, and for the first time since arriving on Corel, 9. She let something show in her eyes that she usually kept locked away. Not anger, not fear. Something older and heavier than both. "You were stationed on Aethon 4, Thyra said. It was not a question. "Yes, you were there during the Titan incident." "Yes. Your file says you were reassigned to logistics coordination afterward." No explanation. No disciplinary record. No commendations. No medical discharge. Just a transfer, as if someone picked you up and set you down somewhere else and hoped you would disappear. That is a fair description of what happened. Ira studied her with those large Varani eyes that could see further into the infrared spectrum than human eyes and could detect micro-changes in skin temperature that indicated emotional states. Whatever she saw in Rhea's thermal signature made her upper left hand twitch involuntarily. "Commander Vasquez, I am a scientist. I deal in data and patterns. The pattern I am seeing right now concerns me. A Titan-class energy signature is approaching this station. The only person on this station with direct experience facing a Titan-class threat is classified so deeply that I cannot access the relevant records. And that person is currently eating reconstituted eggs in a storage closet and filing supply requisitions." Thyra's voice dropped lower, the harmonic overtones shifting to something that sounded almost like respect. "I am asking you directly. Do you know something about what is coming that the rest of us do not?" Rhea looked at her for a long moment. Thyra was intelligent. That was obvious to anyone who spent 5 minutes in her presence. But intelligence came in many forms, and Thyra's form was the kind that sought answers through data, through measurement, through the careful accumulation of facts until a picture emerged. She was thorough, precise, and patient. She was also, Rhea realized, the only person on this station who had thought to look at a logistics coordinator's personnel file and ask why it had gaps. "I know some things," Rhea said carefully, "but knowing things and being believed are 2 different problems. And on this station, I am the person who orders water filters. My credibility in a military briefing is approximately 0. What if it were not 0? What if someone with scientific authority presented your knowledge as corroborated analysis?" Rhea tilted her head. "Are you offering to be my credibility?" "I am offering to be your amplifier. You appear to be a signal that this station's receivers are not tuned to detect. I am suggesting we change the frequency." It was the most Varani way of offering an alliance that Rhea had ever heard. And despite everything, despite the weight of what was coming and the memories pressing against the walls she had built around them, she almost smiled. Almost. "Come to my quarters after your shift. Rhea said. Bring your datapad. Bring your security clearance and bring an open mind. Because what I am going to show you will not fit neatly into any framework you currently use to understand warfare. Thyra's 4 hands resumed their independent activities. The conversation apparently filed and catalogued in whatever extraordinary organizational system the Varani used for their thoughts. She nodded once, picked up her nutrition cubes, and left the galley without another word. Rhea finished her breakfast alone. The reconstituted eggs had gone cold, but she ate them anyway, because waste was something she did not tolerate, not in food, not in time, and not in the 72 hours that were now 66 hours and counting. The day proceeded with its usual rhythm. Rhea moved through the station performing her duties, her small frame navigating corridors built for giants, her presence registered and immediately forgotten by every being she passed. She confirmed the overdue power cell shipment, filed the environmental control requisitions, and conducted a routine inventory check of the medical bay's supplies. During the inventory check, she did something she had never done before on Corel 9. She counted the emergency medical kits, not for the manifest, for herself. She noted how many trauma patches were available, how many bone repair injectors, how many units of synthetic blood for each species represented on the station. She noted where they were stored, how quickly they could be accessed, and how many casualties each supply cache could support. She was not doing logistics anymore. She was doing triage planning. And the shift was so subtle, so deeply embedded in the routine actions of a supply coordinator checking boxes on a form, that no one watching her would have seen the difference. But the difference was there, the way a fault line is there beneath a calm surface, invisible until the moment everything breaks. 12 hours after launch, the reconnaissance probe reached the object. The data came in as an encrypted burst transmission, decoded by the station's communication array, and routed directly to Thyra's sensor lab. Within minutes, Drevik had called an emergency briefing. Within minutes after that, every officer on the station was in the briefing room, and the air had the charged quality of atmosphere before a lightning strike. Rhea sat in her usual chair. She held her usual mug. She wore her usual expression of polite, attentive neutrality, and she waited. Drevik activated the holographic display. The image that materialized was sharper now, detailed by the probe's close-range sensors, and the room went very, very quiet. The object was a machine. There was no longer any ambiguity about this. The probe's data revealed a construct of extraordinary complexity, 912 meters long, 437 meters wide, and 209 meters tall. Its surface was covered in interlocking plates of an alloy that the sensors could not fully analyze because the alloy absorbed sensor radiation in ways that suggested it had been designed specifically to resist scanning. But the probe had gotten close enough to detect what lay beneath the surface plates. Weapon systems. Hundreds of them. Energy projectors arranged in overlapping fields of fire that would allow the machine to engage targets in every direction simultaneously. Kinetic launchers capable of accelerating projectiles to a significant fraction of light speed. And at its core, that pulsing energy signature, now resolved in higher detail, showing a power output that exceeded the combined output of every reactor on Corel 9 by a factor of approximately 800. This, Drevik said, and his voice carried a tension that Rhea had never heard from him before, is a Titan-class autonomous war machine. The words landed in the room like stones dropped into still water, and the ripples spread outward through every person present. Gorath's bone plating shifted, a reflexive defensive response that his species could not consciously control. Thyra's hands went still, all 4 of them, again. Several junior officers exchanged glances that contained the universal expression of beings who had just realized they were in danger far beyond anything they had trained for. Titan-class designations are theoretical, Gorath said, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. The classification exists in our tactical manuals as a hypothetical threat level. I was not aware that any confirmed Titan-class engagements had occurred. One has, Drevik replied, Aethon 4, 7 years ago. The records are classified, but the classification itself confirms the event. A Titan-class machine attacked and destroyed a Union colony. The machine was eventually neutralized, but the colony was a total loss. How was it neutralized? Gorath asked. This was the right question, the most important question, and it came from the person Rhea would have least expected to ask it. Because Gorath was a soldier who preferred hitting things to understanding things, But even he could do the math on a machine with 800 times their power output. The method of neutralization is classified, Drevik said. Classified, Gorath repeated. The word came out like something he wanted to bite. A weapon that can destroy everything on this station is approaching, and the method of stopping it is classified. Central Command has been notified. I have requested immediate reinforcement and full declassification of the Athon 4 files. Our communication lag means we will not receive a response for another 19 hours at minimum. Drevik's amber eyes swept the room. In the meantime, we prepare. We reinforce defensive positions. We bring all weapon systems to full readiness. We evacuate non-essential personnel to the station's inner core. And we pray to whatever gods our respective species believe in that reinforcements arrive before that machine does. The briefing dissolved into organized chaos. Officers moved to their stations. Orders were given and confirmed. The station shifted from routine operations to defensive posture, with the mechanical efficiency of a military installation doing exactly what it was designed to do. Rhea remained seated. She watched the holographic image of the Titan rotating slowly in the display, its weapon ports visible as dark points along its surface like the eyes of something vast and patient. She studied its shape, its proportions, the way its mass was distributed. She compared it to what she remembered, and the comparison confirmed what she had feared. This was not the same machine that had attacked Athon. 4. The design was different in several ways. It was larger. Its weapon configuration suggested a later iteration, an improvement on the original design. Someone or something had built the Athon. 4 Titans studied its performance, learned from its eventual defeat, and built a better one. This was a Titan that had been designed to win where the last one had lost. Rhea set down her mug. She stood up from her chair, and she walked out of the briefing room toward her quarters, where Tyra would be waiting, where 14 pages of tactical analysis sat on a terminal screen, and where the next chapter of a story that had begun 7 years ago in the burning ruins of a school was about to be written. The corridors were busier now, filled with personnel moving to defensive positions, carrying equipment, shouting orders in 4 different languages. Rhea moved through them like water through rocks, finding the gaps, the spaces between the larger bodies, navigating without slowing down, and without being noticed. She passed the group of Grothan soldiers she had encountered earlier. They were gearing up in the corridor, strapping on heavy armor plates and checking their pulse rifles with the practiced movements of professional warriors. One of them saw her and nudged his companion again, and the grinding laugh came again, quieter this time because even they could feel that something was wrong, but still present because habits die hard, especially habits built on the assumption that small things are not dangerous. Rhea did not look at them. She kept walking. She had more important things to do than educate a species that measured worth in bone density. Education was coming regardless. It was 912 meters long, and it was getting closer with every passing hour. She reached her quarters. Thyra was already there, standing outside the door because the door was locked and Varani manners prevented her from attempting to override it. She had her datapad in one hand and 3 more datapads under her other arms, and her expression was the Varani equivalent of someone who had been doing very fast thinking and had arrived at very troubling conclusions. Rhea opened the door. They both entered the small room, and Thyra had to crouch slightly to avoid hitting her head on the low ceiling, because the room had been a storage closet, and storage closets were not designed for 7-foot scientists, any more than they were designed for combat veterans hiding from their own histories. I have completed my analysis of the probe data, Thyra said, wasting no time on pleasantries because Varani did not believe in decorating urgent information with social niceties. The machine's energy signature is a 91% match with the Athon 4 records. The 9% variance is consistent with design improvements rather than fundamental architectural differences. This is the same technology. Likely the same builder. Agreed, Rhea said. She sat at her terminal and opened her tactical assessment. Read this. Thyra read. All 4 hands held different sections of the 14-page document simultaneously, her eyes scanning at a speed that would have been dizzying to watch if anyone had been watching. But no one was because they were in a storage closet and the galaxy was looking the other way, as it always did when the most important things were happening. It took her 7 minutes to read the entire document. When she finished, all 4 hands lowered slowly, and she looked at Rhea with an expression that Rhea had never seen on a Vorani face before. It was not surprise. It was not admiration. It was recognition. The look of someone who had been trying to solve a puzzle and had just discovered that another person had already solved it, and had been carrying the answer in silence for 7 years. The tactical analysis alone would take a team of military strategists weeks to produce. You wrote this from memory. I wrote it from experience. Memory is just the delivery system. The section on harmonic resonance targeting. You are describing a method of identifying structural weak points through the machine's own energy signature, turning its power source into a map of its vulnerabilities. This is not standard military doctrine for any species in the Union. It is not. Where did you learn this? Ah, Rhea leaned back in her chair. The chair creaked. Everything in this room creaked because it was old and small and forgotten, like its occupant. I did not learn it. I invented it. On a thon. 4. In real time. While the Titan was killing everyone around me. She paused, and the silence in the room was the kind that has weight. The kind that presses down on you and demands that you sit still and listen. When you are alone and outmatched and out of ammunition and every conventional tactic has failed, you stop thinking about what you were trained to do. You start thinking about what is possible. And what I discovered is that a machine that powerful cannot hide from its own energy. The signature is not just a byproduct of its reactor. It is a structural resonance, a vibration that runs through every component of the machine like a heartbeat runs through a body. And like a heartbeat, it reveals everything about the body's internal architecture if you know how to read it. Thyra was silent for a long time. Then she said, "You used this method to disable the Titan at Aelthon, Bor. I used this method to find the one point on a 900-meter war machine where a single, precisely placed explosive charge would cause a cascading failure in its primary power distribution network. And then I climbed inside it and placed that charge." The words sat between them, like something radioactive, too dangerous to touch, too important to ignore. "You went inside the machine," Thyra repeated, "to a maintenance access point in its lower hull. The opening was approximately 2 feet wide and 3 feet tall, too small for any species on Aethon. 4 to fit through, except me." And there it was, the truth that had been classified and buried and hidden in a storage closet for 7 years. The reason no one wanted to talk about how the Aethon 4 Titan had been stopped, because the answer was not a fleet of warships. It was not a brilliant military strategy executed by a decorated commander. It was not a weapon of equivalent power brought to bear against the machine. It was a small human woman who had crawled into a god-killer through a hole that nothing bigger than her could fit through and had planted a bomb in its heart. The Union classified the incident because the implications were uncomfortable, Rhea said. A Titan-class threat was supposed to require a fleet-level response. Capital ships, orbital bombardment. The full weight of the Union military brought to bear. Instead, it was stopped by a single person who weighed 115 pounds, using a method that no tactical manual had ever described, exploiting a vulnerability that only existed because the machine's builders never imagined that something so small could be a threat. "Oh!" She looked at Thyra with those steady brown eyes that had seen a Titan from the inside. "They designed for armies. They designed for fleets. They designed for power, meeting power. They did not design for me. And if the pattern holds, if this new Titan is built on the same principles, then it will not be designed for me either." Thyra processed this. Her 4 hands moved in small, unconscious patterns that Rhea had learned to recognize as the Varani equivalent of deep thought. "The access point," Thyra said carefully. "You mentioned it was 2 feet wide and 3 feet tall. If this new machine is an improved design, is it not likely that its builders corrected that vulnerability? Sealed the access points, made them smaller, or eliminated them entirely?" Rhea smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of someone who had spent 7 years thinking about exactly this question. "You are thinking like an engineer," she said. "That is useful, but it is not sufficient. The access points are not a design flaw. They are a structural necessity. The machine's internal systems generate heat. Enormous amounts of it. That heat must be vented or it will destroy the machine from within. The access points are part of the thermal regulation system. They cannot be eliminated without redesigning the entire power architecture. They can be made smaller. They can be defended, but they cannot be removed." She pulled up her tactical assessment on the terminal and pointed to a diagram she had drawn from memory, a cross-section of the Titan's hull showing the thermal vent network. They can make the openings smaller, perhaps 18 inches wide instead of 2 feet. They can add internal defenses, automated systems, barriers, traps. They can make it harder to reach the core. But they cannot close every door because a machine that cannot breathe is a machine that destroys itself. And as long as there is a door, there is someone small enough to walk through it. Thyra looked at the diagram. She looked at Raya. She looked at the diagram again, and slowly, carefully, with the precision of a scientist confirming a hypothesis that changed everything she understood about a subject, she nodded. "We need to present this to Captain Drevik," Thyra said. "Yes, but not just the analysis. We need to present it in a way that a Draven military officer will take seriously when it comes from a human logistics coordinator who weighs less than his left arm. That is why I am here," Thyra said. And for the first time, the harmonic overtones in her voice carried something that was unmistakably warmth. "I will be your amplifier. You be the signal." They spent the next 4 hours restructuring Raya's tactical assessment into a formal military brief, combining her experiential knowledge with Thyra's sensor data analysis to create a document that was half intuition and half science, half memory and half mathematics, and entirely unlike anything the Union military had ever produced. When they finished, they had a plan. Not a plan to call for reinforcements, not a plan to evacuate, not a plan to run or hide or pray, a plan to fight. And at its center, at the very heart of the strategy, was a role that only one person on the station could fill. A role that required someone small enough to fit through an 18-inch opening, brave enough to enter a machine that could destroy cities, and skilled enough to find a heartbeat in a god and stop it. Raya looked at the plan on the screen. She looked at her hands, small and steady and scarred in places that her uniform sleeves covered. She thought about Aethon. She thought about the classified file that described what she had done as an anomaly rather than a strategy, a fluke rather than a skill, a thing to be hidden rather than a thing to be understood. She thought about the Grothan soldiers in the corridor and their grinding laughter, and she decided that 7 years of hiding was enough. The command deck of Corel 9 was the largest room on the station, a wide circular space with a domed ceiling that displayed a real-time projection of the surrounding starfield. It was designed to give commanding officers a sense of scale, a visual reminder of the space they were responsible for defending. Right now, that starfield contained a yellow dot that was no longer at the edge of the display. It had moved closer. It was inside the outer sensor perimeter. Captain Drevik stood at the central command platform, his copper scales catching the ambient light from dozens of active displays. He had not slept. Draven could function without sleep for up to 4 standard days before performance degradation. And Drevik was using every hour of that biological advantage to manage a situation that was rapidly exceeding the operational parameters of his station. Communication with Central Command had been sent. No response yet. The lag was maddening. A 31-hour round trip that turned every exchange into an exercise in patience that no one on the station currently possessed. The evacuation of non-essential personnel to the inner core was complete. Weapon systems were charged and cycling through diagnostic checks. Everything that could be done within standard protocol had been done, and it was not going to be enough. Drevik knew this the way experienced officers know things they cannot say out loud, through the gut-level calculation that happens when you compare your resources against a threat, and the numbers come back negative no matter how many times you run them. The command deck door opened, and 2 figures entered. One was Thyra, tall and silver blue, her 4 arms carrying data pads and holographic projectors. The other was the human logistics coordinator, Vasquez, small and grey uniformed and so utterly out of place on a command deck during a military crisis that Drevik's first instinct was to ask her if she had gotten lost. He did not ask this because Thyra was with her, and Thyra did not waste time escorting lost supply clerks to the wrong room. "Captain," Thyra said, "I request 15 minutes of your time. Senior Analyst Authority, Priority Classification." Drevik's amber eyes moved from Thyra to Raya and back. A Varani senior analyst invoking priority classification was not something that happened often. It meant Thyra believed she had information critical to the station's survival, and Union regulation required the commanding officer to listen regardless of circumstances. 15 minutes, Drevik said. "Speak." Thyra activated a holographic projector, and the air above the command platform filled with data. Sensor readings, energy signature analyses, structural diagrams, tactical projections. The display was comprehensive and meticulously organized. the product of a Varani mind that treated information the way an architect treated building materials, every piece placed with deliberate purpose. The approaching object is a Titan-class autonomous war machine, Thyra began. This has been confirmed. My analysis indicates it shares fundamental design architecture with the Titan that was engaged at Aethon 7 years ago. However, this is not a duplicate. It is an iteration. Improved weapons, denser armor composition, and a modified energy signature that suggests its builders learned from the Aethon 4 engagement and applied those lessons. His eyes tracked the data displays with the focus of a predator following movement. Current defensive capabilities of Corel 9 are insufficient to destroy or disable this machine through external engagement, Thyra continued. Our combined weapons output is approximately 0.12% of what would be required to penetrate its outer hull at maximum power concentration. Reinforcements from Central Command, even if dispatched immediately upon receiving our message, cannot arrive within the engagement window. We are, by conventional military assessment, incapable of surviving this encounter. I am aware of our situation, Senior Analyst, Drevik said, and his voice carried the cold precision of a commander who had already done this math and did not enjoy hearing it confirmed.
Yes, Captain.
But conventional military assessment does not account for unconventional methods. Thyra gestured, and the display shifted to show a cross-section of the Titan's projected internal architecture. Commander Vasquez has provided a tactical analysis based on direct experience with the Aethon 4 Titan. This analysis identifies a viable method of engagement that does not require fleet-level firepower. Drevik's gaze shifted to Raya. She stood beside Thyra, and the contrast between them was stark. Thyra was 7 feet tall with 4 arms and the authority of a senior scientific position. Raya was 5 feet 2 with 2 arms and the authority of a supply requisition form. Standing next to each other, they looked like a monument in its shadow. Commander Vasquez, Drevik said, using her rank in a way that was technically correct but carried an undertone of question, as if he was testing whether the title still applied to someone who spent her days counting water filters. You were on Aethon 4. I was. Your file is classified beyond my access level, which means either you did something so terrible it needed hiding, or something so extraordinary it needed containing. Given that you are not discharged or imprisoned, I assume the latter. His amber eyes narrowed. What did you do on Aethon 4? This was the moment. 7 years of silence. 7 years of being small and quiet and forgotten, all balanced on the edge of what she said next. She could feel the weight of it, the way you feel the weight of a door you are about to open that you know you cannot close again. I went inside the Titan, she said, through a thermal ventilation access point in its lower hull. The opening was too small for any other species present. I navigated the machine's internal structure using the resonance pattern of its energy signature as a map. I located its primary power distribution node. I placed an explosive charge. I exited the machine. The charge detonated. The Titan experienced a cascading power failure that disabled it permanently. The command deck was silent. Not the comfortable silence of people processing information, the sharp, ringing silence of people recalibrating their understanding of reality. Gorath was present. He had been standing at the tactical station, overseeing weapons readiness. He turned his massive body toward Raya, and his bone plating shifted in patterns that indicated surprise, which for a Grothan was a rarely displayed emotion. You, Gorath said, the single word carrying more disbelief than most languages could fit into a full sentence. Me, Raya confirmed. You went inside a Titan-class war machine. Yes, alone. There was no one else who could fit. Gorath stared at her. His eyes, small and deep-set beneath heavy ridges of bone, moved across her tiny frame as if seeing it for the first time. As if every previous time he had looked at her and seen nothing, a mistake had been made, and the universe was now demanding a correction. The access points, Drevik said, pulling the conversation back to tactical focus. You believe this new Titan will have similar vulnerabilities. Thyra answered this, switching the display to the thermal analysis data. The energy signature indicates an active thermal regulation system consistent with internal venting architecture. The machine generates enormous heat as a byproduct of its power generation. This heat must be expelled through physical openings in the hull. These openings are a structural necessity, not a design choice. They cannot be eliminated without fundamentally redesigning the machine's power system. But they can be defended, Drevik observed. Yes, Raya said. And they will be. The builders had 7 years to study what happened on Aethon. 4. They know their Titan was defeated through internal sabotage. They will have added internal defenses, automated weapons, physical barriers. Perhaps biological deterrents, chemical agents, or temperature extremes designed to kill any intruder. The path inside will be harder than it was on Aethon. And yet you are proposing to take that path again, Drevik said. It was not quite a question. It was more like a statement being tested against the person making it, the way you press on a bridge beam to see if it holds weight. I am the only person on this station who can. The access points, even on the original design, were 2 feet wide. On an improved design, they may be as small as 18 inches. No Grothan can fit. No Varani can fit. No Draven can fit. Among the humans on record in the Union military, I am one of very few with the physical dimensions, the combat experience, and the specific knowledge required for this mission. And if the openings are smaller than 18 inches? Then I will find another way in. Machines this size have thousands of surface features, maintenance hatches, sensor ports, ammunition feeds. They are complex systems, and complex systems have seams. I will find a seam. Drevik studied her for a long moment. His reptilian face was difficult to read, but Raya had spent 8 months on his station and had learned to interpret the subtle shifts in his scale coloring that indicated his emotional state. Right now, his scales were darkening slightly at the jaw, which meant he was engaged in serious tactical consideration rather than dismissal. He was actually thinking about it. Even if you gain entry, Drevik said, you would need to navigate an actively hostile interior, reach the power distribution node, place a charge, and escape the Aethon. Fort Titan was presumably not expecting internal sabotage. This one will be. You would be walking into a trap that was specifically designed to prevent what you are proposing.
Yes.
And you believe you can survive this? Raya did not answer immediately. She let the silence hold for 3 heartbeats because she wanted what she said next to carry the weight it deserved. I believe survival is not the primary objective. The primary objective is disabling the Titan before it reaches this station and kills every person on it. My survival is secondary to that objective. I will do everything in my power to complete the mission and come back alive, but I will not pretend that personal risk should be a factor in deciding whether this station and everyone in it lives or dies. Something changed in the room when she said that. It was not visible. It was not audible. It was a shift in the gravity of the conversation. The moment when the people listening stopped seeing a small woman in an oversized uniform and started seeing something else. Something that did not have a name in any language spoken on this station. Gorath was the first to break the silence. He took a step forward, and then another, until he was standing directly in front of Raya. He towered over her. The top of her head barely reached his chest. His bone-plated hands, each one large enough to wrap entirely around her torso, hung at his sides. He looked down at her. She looked up at him. And then Gorath did something that no one on the command deck had ever seen a Grothan soldier do. He placed his right fist against his chest plate, over the spot where his species' primary heart sat behind 4 inches of solid bone. It was the Grothan salute, the gesture reserved for warriors. Not officers, not commanders, not politicians. Warriors. Beings who had proven themselves in combat in ways that transcended rank and species and size. He held the salute for 5 seconds, which in Grothan custom was the maximum duration, reserved for those who had earned the highest possible respect. Then he stepped back. No words, no grinding laughter, just the sound of bone plating settling into a new configuration, a posture that Raya recognized as the Grothan stance of deference to a superior combatant. She nodded to him. A small nod, acknowledgement without performance. And then she turned back to Drevik because there was work to do and time was not waiting. I need 3 things, she said. First, I need Thyra's sensor data continuously updated and fed to a portable receiver that I can carry. The energy signature is my map inside the machine, and I need it in real time. Second, I need an explosive charge, small enough for me to carry, powerful enough to disrupt a primary power node. Third, I need the station's external weapons to engage the Titan when it arrives, not to destroy it because they cannot, but to distract it, to draw its attention outward, while I go inward. Drevik processed this. His scales shifted through 3 different color phases, a sign of rapid tactical evaluation. Then he nodded. Senior Analyst Thyra, begin configuring a portable sensor unit. Lieutenant Gorath worked with the armory to design an appropriate explosive charge. I will coordinate the external engagement strategy. He paused, and his amber eyes locked onto Raya with an intensity that she felt like heat on her skin. Commander Vasquez, you have 48 hours to prepare. I suggest you use them well. I intend to. The command deck came alive with activity. Officers moved to their stations with renewed purpose, the paralyzing uncertainty of an impossible situation replaced by the focused energy of a plan that was insane but at least existed. Having something to do, even something suicidal, was better than waiting to die. Raya left the command deck and walked toward the lower levels of the station where the physical training facilities were located. She had not used them since arriving on Coral. 9, because using them would have drawn attention to the fact that a logistics coordinator maintained a physical training regimen that belonged to a combat operative, and attention was something she had avoided for 7 years. That time was over. The training facility was designed for Grothan physiques, which meant the equipment was comically oversized for her. The resistance machines were calibrated for beings that could bench press small vehicles. The running track was built for stride lengths 3 times her own. The obstacle course featured walls 12 feet high and gaps 8 feet wide. She ignored the equipment and went to the open mat in the center of the room. She stripped off her logistics uniform, revealing a compression suit underneath that she wore at all times. A habit from Aethon 4 that she had never broken because it meant she was always ready to move. The suit was black, form-fitting, and covered in small pockets designed to hold tools, chargers, and medical supplies in configurations that did not impede movement. She began with stretching, a routine that would have looked to an outside observer like something between yoga and contortion. Her body was small, but it was not fragile. Beneath the surface, her muscles were dense and specific, trained not for raw strength but for the particular combination of flexibility, endurance, and precision that her style of combat required. She could bend in ways that other humans found uncomfortable, and other species found structurally impossible. She could hold positions for extended periods without tremor. She could move through spaces that would stop a person even slightly larger than herself. This was not natural ability. This was the product of 7 years of quiet, obsessive training conducted in the privacy of a storage closet, using improvised equipment and bodyweight exercises adapted from Earth's oldest martial traditions. She had trained in silence because training was not something logistics coordinators did. She had trained in secret because preparation for a mission that might never come was indistinguishable from obsession if you explained it to the wrong person. But the mission had come, and she was ready. She moved through her exercises for 2 hours. Crawling through simulated tight spaces, she created using stacked supply crates from the adjacent storage room, practicing the specific form of climbing that she had developed on Aethon 4, a technique that used opposing pressure from her back and feet to ascend vertical surfaces within narrow passages, testing her reaction time using a training program on her personal device that she had written herself, one that simulated the timing patterns of automated defense systems based on the Aethon 4 Titan's internal security responses. She was sweating and breathing hard when the training facility door opened and Gorath entered. He stopped when he saw her, his massive frame filling the doorway, his small eyes taking in the scene. The open mat. The supply crates arranged in narrow corridors, the small human woman moving through them with a speed and precision that belonged in a combat unit, not a supply office. He watched her for a full minute without speaking. Then he entered the room fully and sat on a bench that creaked under his weight. He sat and he watched, and his bone plating was in the configuration she now recognized as respect. The explosive charge is being fabricated, he said when she paused to drink water. I have instructed the armory to design it for your specifications. 3 pounds total weight, shaped blast pattern, magnetic attachment system, timer and remote detonation capability. Thank you, Lieutenant. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that surprised her. On my homeworld, there is a creature called a Vethkal. It is very small, the length of your forearm. It lives in the rock crevices of the deep mountains where nothing larger can reach. The great predators of our world, the machines of bone and muscle that we evolved from, they cannot touch the Vethkal. It goes where they cannot follow. It nests in the spaces between the stones that hold up mountains. He paused. His grinding voice had taken on a quality she had not heard before, something like reverence. The elders say that when the gods built our world, they made the great creatures first. They were proud of the great creatures. They gave them size and strength and armor. Then they made the Vathkal, and they gave it something different. They gave it the spaces between things, the gaps that size cannot fill. And the elders say that the spaces between things are where the real power lives, because the spaces hold the great creatures together, and without them, everything large falls apart. He looked at her, this immense warrior made of bone and fury, and his eyes held something that his species rarely showed to outsiders. "I laughed at you," he said, "when you arrived on this station." I laughed. My soldiers laughed. We saw your size and we measured you by the only standard we knew, and by that standard, you were nothing. He placed his fist against his chest plate again. I was wrong. My standard was wrong. And when this is over, I will tell every growth hand soldier I meet that there is a human woman who makes me ashamed of my own arrogance. Way up. The distance between their eyes was nearly 4 feet. It was absurd. And it was beautiful. And it was the most genuine thing anyone had said to her since Aethon. 4. "Save the speeches for after," she said. "We have a Titan to kill." Gorath made the grinding sound again, but this time it was not laughter. It was something else entirely. It was the sound a Grothan makes when they find something they want to fight beside rather than against. He stood, nodded once, and left the training facility. Raya watched him go, then returned to her exercises. She had 46 hours. Every minute mattered. Every stretch, every crawl, every simulated obstacle course run brought her body one step closer to what it would need to be when the Titan arrived. She trained until her muscles burned and her joints ached and her vision blurred with exhaustion. Then she stopped, cleaned up, changed back into her logistics uniform, and went to the sensor lab to work with Thyra on the portable receiver configuration. The portable unit was a challenge. Standard military sensors were built into equipment that weighed 40 pounds or more, designed to be carried by species for whom 40 pounds was negligible. Rhea needed something that weighed less than 2 pounds, could be worn on her body without restricting movement, and could receive and display energy signature data in real time with enough resolution to navigate inside a Titan-class machine. Thyra solved this by stripping a standard sensor unit down to its core components and rebuilding it into a forearm-mounted display no larger than a wide bracelet. The display showed the Titan's energy signature as a three-dimensional map overlaid on her visual field through a small earpiece that converted data into spatial audio cues. A low hum meant she was moving toward the power core. A high pitch meant she was approaching a weapon system. A specific rhythmic pattern meant she was near a thermal vent, which could be an exit route or a lethal temperature zone depending on the machine's current operating state. They tested it for hours, using the Titan's existing energy data transmitted by the probe. Rhea walked through the station's corridors with her eyes closed, navigating by sound alone, learning the audio language of the machine's heartbeat until she could distinguish between different system types by the frequency and rhythm of their resonance. Thyra watched her with growing fascination. "You are learning an entirely new sensory language in real time," she observed. "Your neural plasticity is remarkable. It is not plasticity. It is stubbornness." Thyra's harmonic overtones suggested she disagreed but respected the deflection. They worked late into the station's night cycle. When Thyra finally left to rest, Rhea stayed in the sensor lab, listening to the audio feed with her eyes closed, memorizing patterns, building a mental model of the Titan's interior that grew more detailed with every passing hour. She thought about Aethon. 4. She thought about the last time she had listened to a Titan's heartbeat, not through a sensor unit but through the walls of the machine itself, pressing her ear against alien metal while the world burned outside and the machine's interior hummed with a power that vibrated her teeth. She thought about the moment she had found the power node, the way the hum had changed from a steady pulse to something almost singing, a frequency that resonated with her bones and made her feel like she was standing inside a living thing rather than a machine. She had placed the charge with hands that shook, not from fear but from the vibration, and she had set the timer for 90 seconds because that was how long she calculated it would take her to reach the nearest thermal vent and drop through it to the exterior. She had made it in 87 seconds. The blast had caught her 3 meters from the ground, throwing her forward into a landing that broke 2 ribs and her left wrist. She had lain in the dirt looking up at the Titan as it shuddered, as its lights flickered, as its weapon ports went dark one by one like stars going out, and she had watched it die. She had cried, not from relief, not from pain, from the sheer, overwhelming strangeness of being the smallest thing in a world of giants, and having that be the reason she survived. The reason everyone who was left survived. Rhea opened her eyes. The sensor lab was quiet. The audio feed hummed softly in her earpiece, the distant heartbeat of a machine that was coming to kill her. She removed the earpiece, placed it carefully on the workbench, and went to her quarters to sleep. 6 hours. Not a minute more, not a minute less. Rest was a weapon, and she had a war coming. She slept, and in her dreams, she was inside the Titan again. But this time, the machine knew she was there, and it was waiting. 30 hours before the Titan reached weapons range of Corel. 9. A message arrived from Central Command. It came through the encrypted relay chain, stripped of formalities and administrative language, which told Drevik more about the situation than the words themselves did. When Central Command stopped being polite, it meant they were scared. The message confirmed that the Aethon 4 files had been partially declassified for Coral 9's commanding officer. Attached to the message was a data packet containing after-action reports, energy signature analyses, and a personnel file that had been sealed for 7 years. Drevik read it alone in his quarters. He read it twice. Then he sat in silence for 10 minutes, his scales cycling through colors that no one was present to interpret. The personnel file belonged to Commander Raya Vasquez. What it contained was not what he expected, because what he expected was a story about luck or desperation or some combination of battlefield chaos that had produced an improbable result. What he got instead was a meticulous clinical account of a tactical operation that had been conceived, planned, and executed by a single person in real time under conditions that would have broken most soldiers regardless of their species. The Aethon 4 report described how Vasquez had spent 4 hours observing the Titan's movement patterns after the initial assault destroyed the colony's primary defenses. While surviving soldiers retreated to bunkers and called for evacuation, she had positioned herself at observation points around the machine's patrol route, timing its turns, mapping its weapon discharge patterns, identifying the rhythmic blind spots in its sensor sweeps that occurred every 43 seconds as the array recycled. She had identified the thermal venting system through vibration analysis, pressing her hands against the ground within 200 meters of the machine and feeling for the specific tremor pattern of superheated gas being expelled through hull openings. She had triangulated the vent locations using 3 observation points and basic geometry, then confirmed them visually during a sensor blind spot when she had approached within 50 meters of the machine's hull. 50 meters, on foot, in the open, from a Titan-class war machine. The report noted that every senior officer who survived the engagement had initially refused to believe this part of the account. Video evidence from a damaged but partially functional security camera had confirmed it. The footage showed a small figure, barely visible against the massive scale of the machine, moving in precise timed sprints between cover points, freezing during sensor sweeps, advancing during blind spots, approaching the Titan the way water approaches rock, finding every crack, every gap, every moment of inattention and flowing through it. The explosive charge she had used was improvised. The colony's armory had been destroyed in the initial assault. What she had found was a damaged mining detonator in a collapsed storage facility, originally used for geological survey work. She had modified it using components from a destroyed communication relay, increasing its yield by a factor she calculated by hand on a piece of torn paper that was later recovered and included in a classified file. She had entered the machine through a thermal vent on its underside, a rectangular opening 18 inches by 24 inches, located between 2 secondary armor plates. The opening was cycling between ambient temperature and 400 degrees at irregular intervals as the machine's heat management system operated. She had timed the cool cycles, determined she had approximately 9 seconds between thermal pulses, and entered during a window that left her less than 2 seconds of margin. Inside the machine, she had navigated 300 meters of internal structure, in complete darkness, using only the vibration patterns conducted through the machine's walls to guide her toward the power core. The internal space was not designed for occupants. It was a jungle of conduits, structural supports, moving components, and automated maintenance systems that presented constant hazards. She had squeezed through gaps, climbed walls, crossed chasms above active energy channels, and done all of it in darkness, by feel, guided by the rhythm of a machine that did not know she existed. She had reached the power distribution node in 47 minutes. She had placed the modified mining charge on the primary junction coupling. She had set the timer and begun her exit. She had escaped through the same thermal vent with 3 seconds to spare before the next heat pulse. The charge had detonated. The Titan had experienced a cascading failure that shut down every system in sequence over a period of 11 minutes. It had fallen. 900 meters of alien war machine collapsing onto the ruins of the colony it had destroyed, and it had not moved again. Drevik closed the file. He looked at his hands, scaled and strong, hands that had commanded a station for 6 years and had never once been tested the way that small human woman had been tested on the worst day of her life. He understood now why the file had been classified, not because of what it revealed about the Titan, because of what it revealed about humans. Because if the other species in the Union truly understood what a creature that size was capable of when pushed to its limits, it would change the way every species in the galaxy thought about threat assessment, military doctrine, and the fundamental question of what makes a being dangerous. The answer was not size. It was not strength. It was not armor or weapons or power output. The answer was refusal. The absolute, bone-deep, unbreakable refusal to accept that the situation was impossible. And humans, these soft, small, fragile beings from a single blue planet in an unremarkable star system, had more of that quality than any species Drevik had ever encountered. He composed his response to Central Command. It was brief. Vasquez's plan is tactically viable. No reinforcements will arrive in time. We are proceeding with internal sabotage strategy. Request authorization to grant Commander Vasquez operational command for the engagement. Drevik, Corral, 9. The response came back faster than expected, which meant Central Command had people monitoring the channel in real time. 2 words. Authorization granted. Drevik called another briefing. This time, when Raya walked into the room, people looked at her differently. Not all of them. The change was not universal or instant, but it was there. In the way eyes tracked her movement, in the way conversations paused when she passed, in the way the room's attention shifted toward her like iron filings turning toward a magnet they had not previously noticed. Drevik formally transferred operational command for the Titan engagement to Commander Vasquez. The words were procedural, standard military language for a transfer of authority that happened routinely in situations where specialized expertise was required. But the meaning underneath the words was something else entirely. A Draven captain, a 6-year station commander, a being twice her height and 5 times her mass, was handing control of his station's survival to a woman who had spent 8 months ordering water filters. Raya accepted the command with a nod. No speech. No ceremony. She had never been interested in the theater of authority. She was interested in getting things done, and there was an enormous amount to get done in the 28 hours remaining. She reorganized the station's defensive strategy from the ground up. The original plan had been purely defensive, holding position and hoping the Titan's weapons could be weathered until reinforcements arrived. Raya replaced this with an active engagement strategy that treated the station's weapons not as defenses but as distractions. The Titan will approach from the Kesserin corridor, she explained, standing at the holographic display and manipulating the tactical map with the ease of someone who had been thinking about this problem for 7 years. Its approach vector gives us a window of approximately 12 minutes between the time it enters our maximum weapons range and the time it enters its own optimal engagement range. During those 12 minutes, we need to accomplish 2 things. First, we need to get the Titan's attention focused entirely on the station. Second, we need to get me to the Titan. She highlighted a route on the map. I will launch in a single-person reconnaissance shuttle, minimum emissions during the initial weapons exchange. The shuttle will use the station's energy output as cover, hiding its signature within the noise of our weapon discharges. I will approach the Titan from below, matching its velocity, and dock at one of the thermal vents on its underside. What if the Titan detects the shuttle? Drevik asked. Then I die and you proceed with conventional defense. But the probability of detection is low. A reconnaissance shuttle running on passive systems produces an energy signature roughly equivalent to a small debris fragment. In the chaos of a weapons exchange, with the station firing everything it has, the Titan's sensors will be processing enormous amounts of data. A debris-sized contact will not be prioritized. You hope, Gorath said, but there was no mockery in his voice. It was the observation of a warrior assessing risk. I calculate, Raya corrected. Hope is for people without data. I have data. She spent the next 6 hours working with every department on the station. With Gorath and the weapons team, she designed a firing pattern that would maximize the Titan's sensor load while minimizing actual threat to the machine, making the station appear to be fighting with everything it had while actually preserving power reserves for the sustained engagement that would be needed after she was inside. The weapons would fire in rotating sequences, constant enough to demand the Titan's attention, varied enough to prevent it from establishing a predictive pattern and dismissing the threat. With Thyra, she refined the portable sensor unit until it could distinguish between 17 different internal system types based on their energy signatures alone. They created a priority map that would update in real time, showing Raya the most efficient path to the power core based on the machine's current internal conditions. If the Titan reconfigured its internal defenses in response to her presence, the map would adapt. With the station's engineering team, she modified the reconnaissance shuttle. They stripped out everything non-essential, every instrument, every comfort system, every piece of equipment that was not directly required for approach and docking. They added a magnetic grapple system designed for hull contact, borrowed from the station's external maintenance equipment. They reduced the shuttle's mass to the bare minimum, making it faster, quieter, and harder to detect. With the medical team, she planned for casualties, not her own, the station's. When the Titan engaged Corel, 9, there would be damage. The station could not fight a Titan-class machine without taking hits, even with a defensive strategy designed to minimize exposure. She designated triage points, assigned medical teams, pre-positioned emergency supplies, and established evacuation routes from the most vulnerable sections of the station. She did all of this with the calm, systematic efficiency that everyone on the station had previously attributed to her competence as a logistics coordinator. Now they saw it for what it really was. The same mind that had fought a Titan from the inside was now fighting one from a planning table, and the difference was only in the scale, not in the skill. 18 hours before engagement, Raya took a break. She returned to her quarters, ate a meal she did not taste, and sat in the darkness of her storage closet room, listening to the hum of the station's environmental systems and the distant, barely perceptible pulse of the approaching Titan's energy signature that was now close enough for the station's sensors to detect without the relay probe. The sound was different from the Aethon 4 Titan. Deeper, more complex, like a chord instead of a single note. The improvements were audible, layers of resonance that suggested additional power systems, redundant networks, and a complexity that would make navigating its interior significantly more difficult than what she had faced before. She closed her eyes and listened, the way a musician listens to a piece of music they will need to perform, memorizing not just the notes but the spaces between them, the way the rhythm breathed, the way the harmony shifted and settled. The Titan was a composition, and she needed to know it well enough to play it in the dark. Hours passed. She did not move. She barely breathed. She sat in that small, dark room and she listened to the heartbeat of the thing that was coming to kill everyone she had spent 8 months living beside, and she built a map of its interior in her mind, note by note, pulse by pulse, until the map was as real to her as the walls around her. At 12 hours before engagement, she went to the training facility for a final physical preparation session. Her body was as ready as it would ever be. The session was less about physical improvement and more about calibration, testing her range of motion, confirming her reaction times, ensuring that every joint and muscle was in the precise condition needed for what lay ahead. Gorath was there. He had been spending his non-duty hours in the training facility as well, not training himself, but watching her, learning her movements the way a student of warfare studies an unfamiliar fighting style. He sat on his bench, his grinding voice silent, his eyes following her with an attention that had nothing to do with curiosity and everything to do with respect. When she finished, he stood and approached her. In his hands he carried something she had not seen before. It was a piece of Grothan bone plating, roughly the size of her palm, dark and polished and obviously old. She recognized it from the cultural briefings she had studied when she first joined the Union military. It was a Vethkan, a bone shard from a warrior's own body, given to another as a mark of absolute trust and kinship. Among the Grothan, giving a Vethkan meant placing your survival in another person's keeping. It was the deepest bond their species recognized. Gorath held it out to her without ceremony, without words. She took it. It was warm from his hands, heavy for its size, and it fit perfectly in her palm. She looked up at him. He looked down at her. And in the space between them, something that had never existed before in the history of two very different species came into being. A bond that transcended every measurement that either of their worlds had ever used to define worth, She placed the bone shard in one of the pockets of her compression suit, against her chest where she could feel its weight with every breath. "Come back," Gorith said. Just that. 2 words in his grinding voice. It was the most a Grothan warrior could say to another warrior before battle. "I intend to," she replied. At 8 hours before engagement, Raya walked the station one final time. She checked every system, every preparation, every detail of the plan she had built over the past 48 hours. She moved through corridors that she had walked hundreds of times as a logistics coordinator, but now the station felt different, not because it had changed, but because her relationship to it had. She was no longer a ghost moving through a machine. She was the immune system of an organism preparing to fight off an infection. She passed soldiers she had never spoken to who nodded to her as she passed. She passed technicians who had never learned her name, who now stepped aside and watched her go with expressions that mixed fear and something brighter. She passed a group of Grothan warriors, the same group that had laughed at her in the corridor days ago, and they stood at attention as she approached. Fists against chest plates, the full warrior salute held at maximum duration. She returned the salute. It felt strange in her body, the Grothan fist-to-chest gesture performed by human hands. But the Grothan did not seem to find it strange at all. They seemed to find it exactly right. At 6 hours before engagement, Rhea went to the shuttle bay. The modified reconnaissance shuttle sat in its cradle, stripped down to its skeleton, looking like a blade rather than a vessel. It was the smallest craft in the station's inventory, barely larger than a ground vehicle, designed for speed and stealth rather than comfort or endurance. It had a single seat, a rudimentary control interface, and just enough power to make one trip. She climbed into the cockpit and ran through the pre-flight checklist. Every system responded within parameters. The magnetic grapple was charged. The passive sensor array was calibrated. The shuttle was ready. She was ready. She sat in the cockpit for a while, alone with the silence and the distant pulse of the approaching machine. She thought about the people she had gotten to know on this station. Thyra, with her 4 tireless hands and her harmonic voice, and her willingness to see value in something that everyone else had overlooked. Goraf, who had laughed at her and then given her the most sacred object his culture possessed. Drevik, who had trusted her enough to hand over command of his station because the data told him she was the right person, even though everything he could see with his eyes told him otherwise. She thought about the soldiers who would fight and die defending the station while she was inside the machine. Some of them would not survive the engagement regardless of whether her mission succeeded. The Titan's weapons would hit the station. Sections would decompress. Systems would fail. People would be hurt, killed, lost in the cold mathematics of warfare that did not care about individual lives. She thought about Aethan. 4. About the 12,000 people who had lived there. About the 2,000 soldiers who had defended it. About the 11 other humans in her squad who had died in the first hour. About the faces she carried with her every day, stored in a part of her memory that she could not access voluntarily, but that visited her in dreams and quiet moments, reminding her that she was alive because they were not. She thought about the people who had classified her, the Union officers who had looked at what she did and decided it was too uncomfortable to acknowledge. The bureaucrats who had buried her in a supply closet because a small human woman who could kill a god machine did not fit into any category they were prepared to manage. The system that had taken her extraordinary ability and treated it as a clerical inconvenience. She did not feel anger about this. She had never felt anger about it. What she felt was something quieter and more permanent. A certainty that the galaxy's definitions of power and weakness were fundamentally wrong, and that eventually, inevitably, those definitions would be corrected by reality. Reality was 912 meters long, and it was less than 8 hours away. At 4 hours before engagement, Tyra came to the shuttle bay. She carried the portable sensor unit in her upper right hand, fully charged and final calibrated. She helped Rhea secure it to her left forearm, adjusting the fit until it sat snug against her skin, without restricting wrist movement. "The audio mapping system has been updated with the latest sensor data," Tyra said, connecting the earpiece and running a diagnostic. "The Titan has entered our detailed scanning range. I can now confirm 17 distinct internal system signatures. I have also detected something new." I looked at her. "New?" A rhythmic subpattern within the core energy signature. It was not present in the Aethon. 4. Data. "I believe it may be an internal detection system. a kind of sonar that uses the machine's own energy resonance to identify foreign objects within its structure. An internal detection system changed everything and nothing. It meant the Titan could potentially sense her once she was inside. It meant the machine would know she was there and could direct its internal defenses toward her specifically, rather than relying on passive traps and barriers. But it also meant the machine was broadcasting detailed information about its internal structure through that very detection system. Sonar works by sending out a signal and reading the return. If Raya could read that return signal too, she would have a more detailed map of the machine's interior than the thermal resonance alone could provide. "Can you tune the sensor unit to receive the sub-pattern?" she asked. Thyra's 4 hands moved in a burst of activity that lasted approximately 15 seconds. "Done. The earpiece will now overlay the detection pulse data onto your existing audio map. You will hear the machine looking for you, and in hearing it look, you will see everything it sees." Raya tested the earpiece. The soundscape in her ear expanded, deepening with new layers of information. The Titan's heartbeat was now a symphony of overlapping signals, each one carrying data about the machine's internal geography. She could hear corridors. She could hear junctions. She could hear the specific harmonic signature of automated defense systems powering up and cycling down as the machine's security protocols ran their continuous sweeps. She could hear the machine breathing, thinking, searching. And somewhere in that vast mechanical symphony, she could hear the power core, a deep, steady note underneath everything else, the foundation tone that all the other frequencies were built upon. It called to her the way a lighthouse calls to a ship in the dark, and she fixed its position in her mental map and held it there. Steady and certain, the destination she would navigate toward through whatever hell the machine placed between her and its heart. "Thank you, Thyra," she said. And she meant it not just for the sensor unit, but for the galley table where a 7-foot scientist had sat down across from a logistics coordinator and asked the question that nobody else had thought to ask. Thyra placed one of her 4 hands on Raya's shoulder. The touch was gentle, precise, and deliberate, a Varani gesture that conveyed more than words. It meant partnership. It meant trust. It meant that whatever happened next, Raya would not be alone in the way she had been alone on Athon. "4. The signal is strong," Thyra said softly, the harmonic overtones in her voice resonating with warmth that Raya felt in her chest. "Be the signal." Thyra left. Raya sealed the shuttle's cockpit and began the final power-up sequence. The craft hummed around her, small and fragile, a splinter of metal and will floating in a bay designed for vessels 10 times its size. She placed her hand against the pocket where Gorath's bone shard rested against her chest. She felt its weight, solid and warm, a piece of a warrior who believed in her carried next to her heart. Outside the shuttle bay, the stars turned slowly, and among them, growing closer with each passing minute, a machine the size of a mountain moved through the dark, carrying enough firepower to erase everything Raya was trying to protect. She closed her eyes. She breathed. She listened to the heartbeat of the Titan through her earpiece. Steady and deep and patient, and she waited for the war to begin. The Titan emerged from the Kesserin corridor, like a continent detaching from the fabric of space itself. On Corel, Nine's command deck, every screen, every sensor display, every tactical readout screamed with data as the machine crossed into detailed scanning range, and the full scope of what they were facing became real in a way that numbers on a briefing document could never convey. 912 meters. That number had been abstract before. Now, displayed on the main view screen as a visual overlay against the starfield, it was concrete. The Titan was a darkness against darkness, visible only by the stars it blocked, and the faint glow of its weapon ports cycling through readiness checks. It moved with the slow, implacable certainty of something that did not need to hurry because nothing in its path had ever required it to. Drevik stood at his command platform. His scales had gone pale, the Draven equivalent of elevated stress response, but his voice was steady when he spoke. "All stations report readiness." The reports came in, weapons systems at full power, defensive shields at maximum, medical teams standing by, non-essential personnel secured in the inner core. Every soul on Coral. 9 was where they were supposed to be, doing what they were supposed to do, and knowing with quiet certainty that the next few hours would determine whether any of them saw another dawn. "Commander Vasquez," Drevik said into the communication channel that connected the command deck to the shuttle bay, "the engagement window opens in 11 minutes. Launch when ready. In the shuttle bay, Rhea heard his voice through her cockpit speaker. She opened her eyes. The pre-flight sequence was complete. Every system was green. The shuttle sat on its cradle like an arrow on a bowstring, waiting for the moment of release. Copy, Captain. Launching at engagement -2 minutes. I will need the first weapons volley to be maximum intensity. Give the Titan something loud to look at. Gorath, you heard the commander. Gorath's grinding voice came through the channel from the weapons deck. Maximum intensity. First volley. I will make sure it notices us. I couldn't know why it doesn't matter, but it does damn the wagon wheels to bear from the prior. Then it does Dan picked up a child and then pulled on her prior. Then she sealed the channel, pulled on her earpiece, and let the Titan's heartbeat fill her world. The audio map expanded around her in 3 dimensions. She could hear the machine's approach, its energy signature growing louder and more detailed with every passing second. The detection pulse swept outward from its core in regular intervals, painting the surrounding space with invisible sonar that mapped everything within range. She could hear Corel 9 in that sonar, a bright, solid return signal that the Titan was already tracking, already evaluating, already calculating weapons solutions for. She could also hear the thermal vents, 7 distinct openings on the machine's underside, each one producing a slightly different harmonic as heated gas escaped into the vacuum of space. The largest vent was on the forward section, approximately 2 feet wide based on its acoustic profile. The smallest was near the rear, barely 12 inches. She catalogued them all, prioritized them by size and accessibility, and selected her primary entry point, the third vent from the forward section, approximately 19 inches wide, located between 2 weapon arrays that would create a sensor shadow during firing cycles. 19 inches. She could fit through 19 inches. She had practiced for narrower. The clock counted down. 11 minutes became 10. 10 became 9. The Titan grew on the view screen, its mass eclipsing more and more stars as it approached. On the weapons deck, Gorath's teams made final adjustments to their firing solutions. On the sensor lab, Thyra monitored the real-time data feed that would guide Raya through the machine's interior. On the command deck, Drevik watched the approaching God machine with the calm focus of an officer who had placed his station's survival in the hands of a woman small enough to fit in his uniform pocket. At 2 minutes before engagement, Raya activated the shuttle's launch sequence. The cradle released. Magnetic clamps disengaged. The shuttle drifted forward on minimal thrust, exiting the bay through its atmospheric barrier and entering the cold vacuum of space. She kept the engines on passive mode, producing no thermal signature, no electromagnetic output, nothing that would distinguish the shuttle from the debris and dust that drifted through this region of space. The shuttle moved on its initial momentum, a dead rock among dead rocks, invisible against the vast backdrop of the starfield. The Titan was visible now through the cockpit canopy, not as a shape on a screen, but as a physical presence in space, blocking the stars in a silhouette that stretched across her entire field of view. It was close enough that she could make out surface details, the interlocking armor plates, the weapon ports glowing with contained energy, the angular protrusions that served purposes she could only guess at. It was magnificent in the way that natural disasters are magnificent, beautiful and terrible and utterly indifferent to the lives it would destroy. Engagement window open. Drevik's voice came through her shuttle speaker, barely audible over the Titan's heartbeat in her earpiece. All weapons! Fire! Corel 9 erupted. Every weapon on the station fired simultaneously. Energy beams, kinetic projectiles, missile batteries, all of them unleashing their payload in a coordinated storm that lit up the space between the station and the Titan like a second sun being born. The volley was not designed to destroy. It was designed to scream, to flood the Titan's sensors with so much incoming fire that its processing capacity would be overwhelmed for precious seconds, seconds during which a tiny shuttle drifting in the dark would be nothing more than noise. The Titan responded. Its weapon ports flared to life, and return fire lanced out across the void, striking Corel 9's defensive shields with impacts that made the entire station ring like a bell. The shields held, barely, shedding energy in cascading waves that illuminated the station's hull in shifting patterns of blue and white. The first exchange was deafening, overwhelming, a conversation between giants conducted in the language of destruction. And beneath it, beneath the fire and the fury and the apocalyptic light show, Rhea's shuttle drifted closer to the Titan's underside, like a leaf falling toward the ground in a hurricane. She activated the magnetic grapple at 40 meters from the hull. The grapple fired silently, a thin cable ending in a magnetic clamp that attached to the Titan's underside with a sound she felt through the shuttle's frame rather than heard. The cable pulled taut, and the shuttle began its final approach, drawn toward the machine's belly on a leash of carbon fiber and magnetic force. The thermal vent was ahead. She could see it now. A rectangular opening in the hull that glowed faintly orange at its edges where heat escaped. The acoustic profile in her earpiece confirmed its dimensions, 19 inches by 26 inches, cycling between ambient temperature and 600 degrees on an irregular pattern that she had been studying for the past 12 hours. She had to time her entry perfectly. Too early, and the heat pulse would incinerate her. Too late, and the vent would close as the thermal management system adjusted. She had a window of approximately 8 seconds during each cool cycle, and she needed every one of them. The shuttle touched the hull. She felt the contact through her seat, a subtle vibration as metal met alien alloy. She unstrapped, moved to the shuttle's lower hatch, and opened it. The Titan's hull was directly beneath her. Alien metal stretched in every direction, covered in patterns that might have been decorative or functional, or both. The thermal vent was 6 meters to her left, visible as a dark rectangle in the otherwise unbroken surface. She dropped from the shuttle hatch, landing on the Titan's hull in the zero gravity of space. Her boots had magnetic soles, another modification from the preparation phase, and they held her to the surface as she moved in a crouch toward the vent. Behind her, the shuttle drifted away on the grapple line, a lifeless shell that would remain attached to the hull as her extraction point. She reached the vent. The opening pulsed with heat, a rhythm she could feel through her gloves even at arm's length. She counted the intervals. 5 seconds of heat, 8 seconds of cooling, 5 seconds of heat, 8 seconds of cooling. The pattern was not perfectly regular, varying by plus or minus 1 second, which meant she could not rely on counting alone. She had to feel it. The heat pulse ended. Cold rushed outward from the vent in a wave that she felt on her face. She went in. The opening swallowed her. 19 inches of clearance on each side, and she moved through it with the fluid efficiency of someone who had practiced this exact movement hundreds of times in the corridors of Corel. 9 using stacked supply crates. Her shoulders turned. Her hips shifted. Her body became a liquid thing that poured through the gap like water through a crack in a dam. She was inside. The interior of the Titan was nothing like the cramped mechanical space she remembered from Aethon. This machine had been designed with intent, with purpose, with an architecture that spoke of intelligence behind its construction. The space immediately inside the vent opened into a narrow corridor, roughly 3 feet wide and 4 feet tall, running parallel to the outer hull. The walls were smooth, dark, and warm to the touch. Conduits ran along the ceiling in organized bundles, carrying energy and coolant and data in a circulatory system that served the machine the way veins served a body. She activated the full audio map. The Titan's interior bloomed in her earpiece, a 3-dimensional soundscape of frequencies and harmonics that told her everything the machine was trying to hide. She could hear the weapon systems above her, discharging with rhythmic precision as the machine engaged Corel. 9. She could hear the power core, deep and steady, approximately 400 meters ahead and 200 meters below her current position. She could hear the automated defense systems, dormant for now, waiting in the walls like sleeping predators, and she could hear the detection pulse, the sonar sweep that Thyra had identified, broadcasting outward from the core in regular waves, searching for exactly what Rhea was, a foreign presence, an intruder, a threat. The first pulse passed through her. She felt it as a faint vibration, a tremor in her bones that lasted less than a second. The pulse was searching, mapping, cataloging everything inside the machine's structure and comparing it against an expected baseline. Anything that did not belong would be flagged. Anything flagged would be targeted. Rhea pressed herself against the corridor wall and held completely still. The pulse washed over her and continued outward. A wave of mechanical attention passing through solid metal as easily as light passes through glass. She waited for a response, an alarm, a change in the defensive systems, something to indicate she had been detected. Nothing happened. She exhaled. The detection system was looking for objects, for metal and ceramic and the materials that weapons and equipment were made from. Her compression suit was primarily carbon-based polymers. Her body was water and calcium and organic compounds. She was, From the machine's perspective, not much different from the biological residue of small organisms that might drift through the thermal vents. She was organic noise. Background: ignorable. She was invisible because she was alive. She followed the corridor forward, tracking the power core's acoustic signature through the maze of the machine's internal structure. The path was not straight. Corridors branched, intersected, and sometimes dead-ended at junctions sealed by internal pressure doors that she had to find ways around. She climbed, she crawled. She squeezed through gaps between structural supports that would not have accommodated a being even inches wider than herself. The machine fought Corel, 9 above and around her. She could feel the weapon discharges through the walls, deep thuds that made the floor vibrate and sent ripples through the conduit fluid visible through transparent sections of the piping. The machine was allocating resources to the external battle, drawing power from secondary systems to feed its weapon arrays. This was exactly what the distraction strategy was designed to achieve. Every joule of energy the Titan spent firing at the station was a joule not spent on internal security. She passed the first automated defense node at the 100-meter mark. It was a turret recessed into the ceiling, a small barrel surrounded by sensor arrays that scanned a junction point where 3 corridors met. The turret was active, its barrel tracking in slow arcs that covered the junction space with overlapping fields of fire. Its sensor array was sophisticated, designed to detect motion, heat, and electromagnetic signatures. Rhea stopped. She studied the turret's movement pattern from around a corner, timing its sweep arcs and identifying the sensor array's detection parameters based on the frequency of its scanning signal, which she could hear through her earpiece. The array was looking for thermal signatures above ambient. Her body temperature was 37 degrees Celsius. The corridor was approximately 40 degrees. The difference was 3 degrees, within the noise margin of a sensor system designed to detect powered equipment rather than biological organisms. But the motion detection was a different problem. The turret tracked movement through changes in its visual field, and a person moving through a junction was exactly the kind of change it was designed to respond to. She waited. She listened. The machine fired another volley at Corel, 9, and the power draw caused a momentary fluctuation in the internal systems. Lights dimmed for half a second. The turret's movement stuttered as its power supply dipped. Rhea moved during the stutter. She crossed the junction in 3 quick steps during the fraction of a second when the turret systems were resetting from the power fluctuation, and she was around the next corner before it completed its recalibration cycle. She breathed. Her heart rate was elevated but controlled. Fear was present, a cold knot in her stomach that she acknowledged and set aside because fear was data, not instruction, and the data told her to keep moving. The corridors grew narrower as she descended toward the core. The machine's internal architecture funneled inward, the generous corridors of the outer sections giving way to tighter passages that served maintenance and cooling functions. She passed through spaces barely wider than her shoulders, sliding between conduit banks with inches of clearance on either side. She climbed down vertical shafts using the opposing pressure technique she had developed, her back against one wall and her feet against the other, descending through the machine's layers like a diver going deeper into dark water. At the 200-meter mark, the defense systems intensified. She encountered 3 turrets within a 50-meter stretch, positioned to create overlapping kill zones that covered every approach to the inner sections. These turrets were faster than the first one, their sensor arrays more sophisticated, their response times measured in fractions of a second rather than seconds. She could not use the power fluctuation trick for all of them. She needed a different approach for each one, exploiting specific characteristics of their placement and programming. One turret had a blind spot created by a conduit junction directly behind it. She reached that blind spot by crawling through a cooling duct that ran parallel to the corridor at floor level, a duct so narrow that she had to exhale fully to fit and pull herself forward with her fingertips. Another turret guarded a vertical shaft she needed to descend. Its sensor array covered the shaft opening completely, with no blind spots and no power fluctuations to exploit. She solved this by removing a panel from the conduit bank next to the shaft and rerouting a coolant line so that it sprayed a fine mist of cooling fluid into the turret's sensor field. The mist created enough visual noise to mask her movement as she dropped past the turret and into the shaft below, falling 5 meters in controlled silence before catching herself between the walls and resuming her descent. Each obstacle took time. Each solution required observation, analysis, and precise execution. The minutes accumulated, and with them the knowledge that Corel, 9, was absorbing punishment above her. She could hear the station's weapons fire through the machine's hull, growing less frequent as systems were damaged or power reserves depleted. The distraction was working, but it had a finite lifespan. When the station could no longer sustain fire, the Titan would turn its full attention inward, and every defense system she had bypassed would come looking for whatever had gotten past it. At 300 meters, the audio map in her earpiece shifted. The power core's signature grew from a deep background hum to a physical sensation that resonated in her chest. She was close. The corridors here were narrower still, barely wide enough for her to move on hands and knees, and the walls were warm enough that she could feel heat through her gloves. The machine's heart was nearby, and it radiated like a sun buried in metal. She turned a corner and stopped. The power core chamber was ahead. She could see it through a mesh grating at the end of the corridor, a vast space that opened up in the machine's center like a cathedral. The core itself was a sphere of contained energy, roughly 20 meters in diameter, suspended in the center of the chamber by structural supports that radiated outward like the spokes of a wheel. It pulsed with a light that was not quite light, an emission that existed at frequencies just beyond visible, making it appear to shimmer and shift like something alive. Between her and the core were the final defenses. The chamber was lined with turrets, more than she could count from her position. Sensor arrays covered every surface. And there was something else, something that had not existed on the Aethon. 4. Titan, a network of energy filaments stretched across the chamber space like a web, thin lines of contained plasma that would sever anything they touched. The web was dense, the gaps between filaments no wider than a few inches, and the filaments moved, slowly rotating and shifting in patterns that eliminated any static gaps. The machine had learned. It had been designed by builders who knew that their previous creation had been killed from the inside, and they had turned the core chamber into a death trap specifically engineered to prevent it from happening again. Raya studied the web. She listened to its acoustic signature through her earpiece. Each filament produced a faint hiss, a frequency that varied with its position and movement. She mapped the web in 3 dimensions using sound alone, tracking each filament's trajectory, speed, and rotation pattern. The web was complex, but it was a system, and systems had patterns. The filaments moved in coordinated sequences, creating moments when gaps aligned, when the smallest possible path through the web existed for the briefest possible moment. These moments were rare. They lasted approximately 2 seconds, and the path they created was less than 12 inches wide at its narrowest point. 12 inches. Raya looked at her body. Small. Thin. Exactly the body that every species in the galaxy had dismissed as weak, as insignificant, as unworthy of notice. Exactly the body that the builders of this machine had never considered a threat because no species they knew could move through a 12-inch gap. She smiled. It was the same smile she had smiled in the ruins of Aethon, or standing in front of an 18-inch opening while the world burned around her. The smile of someone who understood with perfect clarity that the galaxy's greatest miscalculation was not about weapons or technology or power. It was about her. She pulled the explosive charge from her suit. Shaped blast. Magnetic attachment. Timer and remote detonation. She armed it, set the timer for 3 minutes, which she calculated would give her enough time to navigate back through the web, up through the corridors, and out through the thermal vent to the shuttle. She watched the web. She listened. She counted the rotations, tracked the alignments, waited for the moment when the 12-inch path opened up between the singing filaments. The moment came. She moved. Her body flowed through the web, like something without bones, without rigid structure, without the physical constraints that defined every other species in the galaxy. She turned, twisted, ducked and contorted through gaps that existed for seconds and disappeared behind her as the filaments rotated back into place. The plasma hissed centimeters from her skin, close enough that she could feel the heat, close enough that a single miscalculation would end her. She did not miscalculate. She reached the core support structure. The primary power distribution node was where her analysis had predicted, a junction point on the main structural spoke where energy conduits converged before distributing power to the machine's systems. She pressed the explosive charge against the junction. The magnetic clamp engaged. With a click she felt through her fingertips. 3 minutes. She turned and went back through the web. The return path was different because the filament pattern had rotated, creating new gaps that she navigated using the audio map updated in real time by Thyra's sensor unit. She moved through the singing plasma lines with the precision of a needle threading cloth, each movement deliberate, each breath timed to the rhythm of the web's rotation. She cleared the web. She entered the corridor. She began to run. The machine's detection pulse swept through her, and this time, something was different. The pulse stuttered, reflected, returned with data that made the machine pause in its battle with Corel. Something was wrong inside. Something foreign was near its heart. The machine's internal defenses activated in full, every turret spinning to active mode, every sensor array shifting from passive scanning to active hunting. Raya ran. She ran through corridors she had memorized on the way in, ducking past turrets that were swiveling toward her position, squeezing through gaps that were now illuminated by emergency lighting that turned the machine's interior into a red-lit maze. The turrets fired behind her, energy bolts scorching the walls where she had been a half-second before. The machine was trying to kill her, but she was moving faster than its internal systems could track, because the internal defenses had been designed for the methodical elimination of intruders, not the pursuit of something that moved like she did, small and fast and unpredictable. She reached the vertical shaft. She climbed it in 30 seconds, her back and feet working in opposing pressure against the walls, ascending with a speed born of adrenaline and years of obsessive training. Below her, a turret fired up the shaft, the bolt passing close enough to singe the sole of her boot. She reached the outer corridor. She could hear the thermal vent ahead, its cycling rhythm now accelerated as the machine diverted power to its defense systems and generated additional heat. The cool cycles were shorter, 5 seconds instead of 8. She had less time to exit. She reached the vent. She could feel the heat radiating from it, hotter than before, the machine burning like a fever as it fought on two fronts. The station outside and the intruder within. She waited for the cool cycle. It came. 5 seconds. She went through the vent head first, her body rotating in the narrow opening, shoulders turning, hips shifting. The movement so practiced and so precise that she cleared the 19-inch gap in less than 2 seconds and emerged onto the Titan's hull. The shuttle was where she had left it, attached to the hull by the magnetic grapple. She crossed the hull surface in magnetic soled bounds, reached the shuttle, pulled herself through the hatch and sealed it behind her. She activated the grapple release. The shuttle detached from the Titan's hull. She fired the engines at full power, abandoning stealth for speed, and the shuttle leaped away from the machine's surface like a stone skipping off water. Behind her, the timer reached 0. The explosion was not visible from the outside. There was no fireball, no dramatic detonation. What happened was worse, more fundamental, more complete. The shaped charge disrupted the primary power distribution node, and the disruption cascaded through the Titan's energy network like a crack spreading through ice. Systems failed in sequence, weapons falling silent, lights going dark, the great machine's heartbeat stuttering and faltering as its circulatory system collapsed from within. The Titan shuddered. Rhea saw it through the shuttle's rear viewport, a tremor that ran through 900 meters of metal and made the machine's surface ripple like the skin of something dying. Its forward momentum slowed. Its weapon ports went dark. Its detection pulse, that constant searching sweep that had been singing in her earpiece for hours, wavered, broke into fragments and stopped. The silence was enormous. The Titan drifted. Powerless. Dark. A mountain of dead metal floating in the void, killed from the inside by something so small that its builders had never imagined it could exist. Rhea flew the shuttle back to Coral. She docked in the shuttle bay without ceremony, without announcement, without anything but the mechanical process of bringing a tiny craft home to a damaged station that was still, against all probability, intact. She climbed out of the shuttle. Her compression suit was scorched in 3 places. Her hands were burned where she had touched surfaces too hot for the gloves to fully protect. The bone shard from Gorath was still in her chest pocket, warm against her heart. The shuttle bay doors opened, and they were there. Gorath, towering and silent, his fist already against his chest. Thyra, her forearms reaching forward, her harmonic voice carrying overtones of relief so profound that Rhea felt them physically. Drevik, his copper scales bright with something that might have been wonder, standing at attention in the Draven military posture of highest honor. And behind them, filling the corridor beyond the shuttle bay, every soldier, technician, analyst and crew member on Corel 9. Grothaun warriors with their fists on their chests, Vorani scientists with their hands outstretched, Draven officers standing at attention, all of them looking at the small woman standing in the shuttle bay with burned hands and a heartbeat that had outlasted a god. No one laughed. No one would ever laugh again. Rhea looked at them, all of them. Every species, every size, every shape. She looked at the faces that had dismissed her, and the faces that had believed in her, and the faces that were only now understanding what they had been living alongside for 8 months without knowing it. She thought about the classified file that would need to be rewritten. She thought about the tactical doctrine that would need to be revised. She thought about the young human soldiers who would come after her, who would grow up in a galaxy that had learned what 115 pounds of human stubbornness could accomplish when the universe made the mistake of underestimating it. She thought about Aethon. 4. About the people she had lost. About the people she had saved today. About the strange, beautiful, terrible arithmetic of a life measured not in size, but in what you were willing to do with the size you had. And standing there, in a shuttle bay on a station at the edge of known space, surrounded by giants who were looking at her the way no one had ever looked at her before, Raya Vasquez did something she had not done in 7 years. She stood at her full height, all 5 feet and 2 inches of it. And it was enough. It had always been enough. The galaxy just needed time to notice.